All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope everyone's feeling really energized. For those joining from the US, I hope you voted yesterday. It's important. For my friends joining from India, happy Guru Nanak Jayanti. My name is Gaurav Goel. I'm the Vice President of Global Strategy at PepsiCo, and I'm joining you from New York City today to talk about organizational biases and how to avoid working in silos. But before we begin, let me get us set up and let's get the tech working. There's a funny joke I say about technology, which is it's like the U2 song With or Without You. And for any Gen Zs here who do not know Bono or U2, you're missing out. Please Google them. All right. I hope my screen comes up and then we get started. All right. Okay. So let me first begin with my story. And I see my life so far in four different stages. I mean, of course, the first part of it is all about sort of growing up. I come from a small, humble family in India. We moved around a lot growing up, and so I went to school in 11 different cities. During the first 18 years of my life, and change was the only constant. My next big phase, which I'm very passionate about, was my first job at Unilever. I first started in supply chain, then moved into sales. Unilever forever will be just a special place for me, and there's quite a few reasons behind it. Okay, one, Unilever was the first company that taught me how large organizations work. How to earn your stripes, how to really build respect for every single job in the organization. I mean, even before I started my first real assignment with Unilever, they made me work as a plant operator in a factory, a frontline salesman in rural parts of India, an R&D lab assistant in personal products, and all of this was before I got on to my first supply chain job. The second reason I'm so passionate about Unilever is, and you see a picture at the bottom of the second column there, I met my wife, Sonica, there 16 years ago, and she still calls us Unilovers. So I'll forever be indebted and grateful to Unilever. And then the third thing was it was the first time in life that I started to learn about biases in organizations. And I'll share an example. In my first role in supply chain, I was constantly trying to figure out what's the best, most accurate demand forecast so I can plan for the highest service levels without having to carry, millions of dollars of excess inventory. Then I moved to the sales side of the organization and I found myself constantly trying to manage that same forecast down so that my targets are down and then me and my team can constantly over deliver, get much higher incentive and praise and promotions and all the good things with it. And my then friend, now wife, Sonica, who'd always been in brand management, as the brand custodian, in love with her brands and wanting to make her brand successful, was constantly pushing that same forecast up in line with the brand's ambitions. And it was quite an interesting place to be where we're all working for the same company with the same goals, but three different parts of the organization looking at the same KPI or metric very, very differently. And that got me thinking. And so when I moved to the third phase of my life, which was moving to the US for my MBA, joining Bain and Company in strategy consulting, which is in many ways an extension of your school. Continued to see more and more similar but very different examples of biases across multiple different industries. I got more interested and excited about the theory behind it. It just got me thinking. And then my last 7 years in my fourth phase at Pepsi, leading strategy and large scale transformations for different parts of the business, I've just built and learned quite a few tools to first recognize and then adapt strategies to address some of these biases. So that's what I would love to talk to you about and share a little bit more on. And then the bottom right picture is a new addition to our family. Harry is a COVID puppy, he just turned 2. And he brings a lot of joy to us. So I thought I'll share. Okay, so let's talk about biases. Okay, biases are all around us. Okay, I often jokingly say that there's only two kinds of people in this world: people that have biases and liars. Joking, but not joking, really. There's many different kinds of biases. Okay, I have five different kinds on the page that I love to talk about, but there's many more. Okay, but let me talk about a few of them, the ones that I'm most passionate about. Okay, pattern recognition biases. Now, all of us at some point in time have found ourselves guilty of confirmation bias. Okay, I'll raise my hand first. I've been guilty of it enough and more times in my life. Now, we are all smart, passionate people. We're paid to have a point of view on things, okay? And then when we walk in with an existing belief or theory into a problem, we often tend to interpret any new evidence as the confirmation of that theory, okay? And believe me, not walking in with a theory or not having a theory of belief is not the right answer. Okay, let's also talk about social biases. Okay, sunflower management is something I'm really passionate about. And quite frankly, I've been on both sides of it. As the one prey to it and as the one the cause for it in different situations. Now, this is the tendency for a group to align with the strong view of a very strong and vocal leader. Just reflect for a few seconds back on your experiences and think about how many times or when have you seen yourself do that. However, what we are here to talk more about are interest biases, especially misaligned incentives. So let's move on to that. Ask yourself, has it ever felt like you were in a tug of war at work? Quite often, even with colleagues you otherwise absolutely love and adore. Okay, I started my story today about demand forecasting at Unilever. Now that definitely felt like a tug of war between sales and supply chain and marketing and some other functions. And there's examples everywhere. Okay, let's talk about innovation for an example. If marketeers in your company are incentivized, let's say, to generate 10 or 20% of revenue in the company from innovation, think about it. Will it always align with the enterprise or the company's goal to maximize growth and profit? May not. What about profit from core? Okay, let's take another example. When R&D, research and development scientists in your company are incentivized, rightly so, to win blind product tests versus competition. So they're able to design and generate a product that really wins in consumer experience versus your competitors. Does it always align with the company's profit goals? Maybe not. And still, marketeer's job is rightly to innovate. R&D scientist's job is rightly to create that better product experience. And so what's going on here? Um, the real reason behind it is that designing incentives in an organization is just really damn hard. Okay. If there's any students here, I was able to join a couple of the other sessions and I saw quite a few students in the participants as well. And if you're wondering if you're ever going to use anything you've learned in an MBA class in real life, well, here's a slide from one of my favorite professors at Kellogg from 11 years ago. And so we still find some places to use what we learn in MBA. Okay, and so there's massive trade-offs in designing org incentives. Okay, it's not because of wrong intent, it's not because organizations don't want to solve for it. This is in spite of the organization solving for it. And so if you think about that spectrum, which is pretty much a cone in this space, one end of the spectrum has local or individual incentives that are very effective, quite steep but quite narrow. Okay, the other end of it are team or group incentives uh, that are broad, that really drive more cooperation, more coordination to achieve those, overarching enterprise goals, but they're quite broad and weak. Okay. The only important thing to note, I'm not an HR expert, so I'm not going to talk about org design a lot more. Maybe David in his next session can do a deep dive on this. But I think the only thing important for us to note is that there's always a trade-off, and that it is impossible to get this 100% right, even with the best intent. In a world of finite resources, you will never get this 100% right. And what that leads to is misaligned incentives in some pockets of the organization. It's just the awareness that's important for us to note. So, what does this mean for folks like us in strategy? Okay, that's what's the most important question here. Now, I know Grim shared her view of what are the different strategy projects, or sorry, phases in a strategy project, across the life of a project. And, I love her framework, and I made a few tweaks to it based on how I see projects. If you talk to five other strategists, we will have our own framework. You can build your own, just focus on what really matters. But I think what's really important here from the perspective of interest biases are three very simple steps. Number one, recognize and accept the presence of interest biases. Two, double down on end to end mindset and thinking. And then three, relevant tactics for different phases of the project. And I will pick a few of those phases. I think three I can talk about in the time we have. Just to give you some examples of the kinds of tactics. Now, those are not exhaustive. You can come up with your own. It's the essence behind it that really matters. So let's talk about the first one. In fact, phase zero is how I love referring to framing the problem. I think quite often we don't spend enough time on framing the problem, and that sets up us up for failure at later stages of the project, or we are required to go back and reframe the problem at different parts of the project. It's very important to frame the key questions to solve from the perspective of the enterprise, your consumers, your customers, and the planet. And if you don't, or your organization doesn't yet care about the planet, then build that awareness, open their eyes. Any functional silos should be layered only after the fact. Okay. So I'm just going to repeat myself again and give you an example. Always elevate the problem to what the problem to solve is for your enterprise, even if it is a simple functional problem like how do we improve service levels. Always reframe it back to for the enterprise. For example, enterprise is unable to maximize revenue and profit, potentially due to lower service levels. It'll just help, trust me. Okay, and obviously being consumer centric and not forgetting your customer and the planet when you're framing the problem is extremely important. Let's take another quick example. This is an easy one. I think you're all very familiar with some of these tools. When you're diagnosing the issue, again, extremely important for you to be holistic. There's a, there's a right balance though, because you need to be MECE, and I'm sure all of you are very familiar. And MECE frameworks have been drilled down in whatever practice you've been a part of in the strategy function. Um, but MECE, along with an answer first or hypothesis driven approach, is the right sort of solution for it, because otherwise you can just be doing a diagnostic for 6 months and never get to an answer. But what I really find quite interesting and I'm very passionate about is really digging deep to get to the root cause, really getting to the causation of it. Six Sigmas, five Whys, just a good tool to really force you to continue to be inquisitive and dig to the much below beneath the surface till you cannot ask the question why again. Let's come to the most important phase from an interest biases perspective, which is designing the solution. And so, as you design a solution and come up with a potential solution for the problem that you've now diagnosed, ask yourself these things. Okay. One, can I articulate the measures of success for the strategic actions that I'm proposing? Okay. KPI design is hard. We can do a whole separate talk just on KPI design, but just know that invest the right effort in it. Two, and this gets very interesting, identify the externalities of your actions and KPIs. Okay. More often than not, local or individual incentives will have some externalities or unintended consequences. List them out. Take the time to talk to the experts who understand their areas to list them out. And then three, work on realignment of those incentives and KPIs to make it work. Okay, no brainer, align and communicate with all stakeholders, but most important, do not, and I repeat, do not hide those externalities under the carpet. Please be transparent, because if you don't address it now, or your organization's not willing to address those externalities now, no matter what you do, your execution has a very high probability of failing. Okay, so don't be an ostrich. All right. Okay. So if you have been taking a nap and you missed all of what I just said, here's a cheat sheet. Five important key messages that I will repeat. One, all humans are biased. Interest biases, misaligned incentives will always exist in some pockets. Two, recognize and accept their presence, then adopt end to end mindset and thinking, and then apply relevant tactics depending on what phase you're in. Three, always frame your problem as an enterprise problem. Take the time to articulate it at that higher level. Four, be holistic, end to end, while diagnosing the problem, but just don't stay in the diagnostic for 6 months. And five, and to me, the most important, transparently communicate the externalities of your strategy and the KPIs you're proposing. Force your leadership to assess either new KPIs, realigning incentives, or in many cases, redesigning the organization to enable success of what you're proposing. Okay, I know I've gone a little over, but Lucas, if there's a few questions you would like me to answer, let me know. All right. How do you drive cultural change in a public sector organization not driven by profit? Okay. So that's a great question. Prima facie, I may not be the best person to answer this because I've never worked in the public sector, really. However, just first principle thinking, I think it always goes back to what are the key goals of your organization. And so if you always go back to what's the mission of my organization, what's the big picture vision, what are the big strategic goals of my organization, um, and you connect, therefore, what is the right culture and people strategy that I need behind it. That's probably the best way to go about it. But I think David may be able to answer that question a lot better. Let's go to the next one. How do you create a space in an organization for employees to recognize, discuss, and make actions towards reducing our biases? A safe space to have this type of dialogue. I mean, I'm very passionate, Andrew, about that question. Thank you for asking. I think, I mean, I'm not a therapist, but I think just for everyone to accept and recognize that it's human to have biases, it's normal to have biases. It's not because of poor or bad intentions or some big, grand, evil plans behind. Just makes it a lot easier to talk about it, because then people are not defensive about why am I being called out for a certain behavior. And so I think it also goes back to the culture of your organization. I think if you can build, especially within your team. I mean, we constantly put the culture of the organization on the executive committee's shoulder, but like I think we own the culture in our teams, and so just creating that safe, environment to openly talk about, feedback and every topic, and then openly sharing your own biases. Your own vulnerabilities when you face some of these biases can actually really incite that engagement. All right, shall we take one more? What is the biggest problem you have seen that was created by bias? I mean, quite frankly, like all of them, have been very large. I mean, probably the easiest one to talk about is, my supply chain days 15 years ago at Unilever, because at a point in time the power in the organization rested with the marketing group. Like most of the CEOs, in the Unilever organization, even now, if you look at the history, are mostly marketeers. We constantly had, a, a strong bias on demand forecast. So we were always overcalling versus what we would actually sell. And so we had large slob, slow moving inventory, lots of write offs, constantly sitting on millions of dollars of inventory, and then running discount schemes, last minute in the last month before expiry of product, and we were losing a ton of money. I mean, at some point it was in the over $100 million of business waste just for the India business unit. Let's take one last one. Biases are often linked to personal character traits. How can you limit the damage from these traits? Would a strong, cohesive organization culture be the answer? I think that's a great question, right? But I think I would also be a little cautious of personalizing those character traits. I think our biggest bet or our best bet in succeeding with biases is to normalize the biases. I think to make people feel like humans, make them feel comfortable about having those biases, um, and then be able to talk about recognizing, accepting, and then tactics to then deal with them so they don't impact your end outcome, versus taking it back to finger pointing on you are this way and therefore you have this bias. At least that's my point of view. Thanks, Suresh. All right. Well, it was lovely. I'm excited about the rest of the sessions. Thank you for your time. Have a good day.